When we finally bought a vacation property, my mother-in-law proclaimed, "As the matriarch, I should have the privilege of using it first, at no cost." My husband gave her a glance, then said something that nearly caused her to faint. This situation had been simmering for some time, and I hadn't intended to share it because I'm not one for drama. However, when you interact with someone who treats your life like a stage performance, you either exit or take center stage. I opted for the latter. This incident occurred last year. My husband and I reside in Santa Clarita, California, a peaceful, suburban area that suits us perfectly. After nearly a decade of saving, we finally purchased a modest vacation home in Big Bear Lake. It was a significant milestone for us, nothing extravagant, but it featured a fireplace, a view of the dock, and most importantly, tranquility. We didn't acquire it for social media. We bought it for privacy, for the future, and for serene weekends filled with wine and the scent of wood smoke. Before I proceed, allow me to introduce my mother-in-law, Susan. Susan has always had a peculiar relationship with control, not in terms of finances, as she doesn't care about costs as long as she is in charge. She doesn't raise her voice or throw dishes. Instead, she wields her words like surgical instruments, using a tone that resembles reading scripture. That's her method of control. She makes you feel that complying with her is the virtuous and mature choice. She's not unintelligent, she's simply crafty and extremely manipulative. One Sunday afternoon, we invited Susan and my father-in-law, who typically keeps a low profile around her, for lunch. We intended to share the news of our vacation home over lasagna and a bottle of red wine. She entered with her typical, "You're fortunate I came" demeanor, complimented the house in a tone that implied she expected it to be inferior, and immediately began lamenting about how exhausted she was from managing everything. We informed her about the house toward the end of the meal. Initially, she was silent, simply blinking, then tilted her head and said, "Well, of course, I'll be using it first. I could use a break." I chuckled, thinking she was joking, but she wasn't. "As the matriarch of this family," she said slowly, "it only makes sense that I get to use it first, and of course, I assume family doesn't pay." My husband's fork halted midway to his mouth. I glanced at him. He looked at her, then quietly set his fork down. What he said next transformed. "Everything. You don't get to claim a title you've never earned." Susan blinked again, as if malfunctioning. The surprise was evident on her face. She did not anticipate his resistance. He wasn't loud, just steady and focused. "You're not the matriarch. You're not in charge of anything. You've spent your entire life manipulating people to revolve around you. That's not leadership. It's control through guilt." She went pale. Not flushed, but pale, as though the ground had been pulled from under her ego without a landing in sight. "We bought that house for ourselves, not for you, not for your bridge group, and not for your half-cousin visiting from wherever. If you ever attempt to guilt-trip my wife or act as though anything we own is automatically yours, we'll change the locks on both properties." I was astounded, not because I didn't want him to say it, but because I had waited nearly 7 years to hear him utter those words. Susan rose without shouting or crying. She merely appeared like someone who had never been confronted by her own son, and suddenly realized that the leash she had used on others had been severed. She departed without uttering a word. Her husband followed. I'm fairly certain he gave my husband a slight nod before closing the door behind him. However, this was not the end. A few days later, I began receiving texts from my husband's sister, Melanie, pleading if we could at least allow their mother to use the place for Mother's Day weekend. Then came the cousins, and soon after, a Facebook post from Susan containing a thinly veiled message about how today's children forget who took care of them during their upbringing. She tagged my husband. Oh yes, she did. We remained silent for weeks. Then, out of nowhere, a friend of Susan's from church, whom I had met once at a wedding, called me and inquired if the vacation home was available for a small prayer retreat. I'm not religious, but I'm also not unkind. I asked when they wanted to use it. "This weekend," she cheerfully replied. "Susan said you offered it to her any time, and she thought this would be ideal." I felt my jaw nearly unhinge like a cartoon character. That's when I realized she hadn't learned a thing. She wasn't embarrassed or humbled. She was regrouping. I informed the church lady that the house was already reserved, then blocked her number. That's when the plan for revenge clicked into place. We weren't just going to keep her out of the house. We would demonstrate just how little control she truly had. The housewarming from hell was initiated. We arranged a low-key housewarming at the cabin 2 weeks later. Just a few friends, no social media posts, no pictures, not even a family invitation. Yet somehow, on Saturday morning, right before our guests arrived, my phone buzzed. It was a photo from an unknown number, a picture of our front porch in Big Bear. Someone had left a gift basket adorned with a satin ribbon that read, "Welcome, matriarch." Inside was a bottle of inexpensive wine, 2 packets of hot chocolate, and a printed schedule for Susan's self-care weekend. Friday meditation and wine by the fireplace. Saturday brunch and light music. Sunday devotional walk by the lake followed. By journaling, the audacity was astonishing. I showed the picture to my husband. He laughed, but I didn't. The more I pondered, the more I sensed something was amiss. Susan had never visited the cabin, so how did she know the address? We had never published it or shared it, not even with extended family. I checked the paperwork and discovered that my sister-in-law, Melanie, was listed as the notary on the title documents. She had been present the day we signed and had offered to assist since she was already a notary and could expedite the process. At the time, I thought nothing of it. It turned out she had made a copy of the deed, the original deed. I found the email trail. She had sent it to Susan the same day we finalized the purchase. My stomach sank. This wasn't merely an overreach. It was a coordinated effort. If they were already crossing boundaries, who knew what else they were capable of? I confronted Melanie first, calling her. She picked up on the second ring, as if she had been anticipating my call. "Oh, hey," she said cheerfully. "Did Mum receive the basket? Wasn't that adorable?" I remained silent. I figured it was all in the family, right? I thought it would be a sweet surprise. "How did she get the address?" I asked. "What do you mean? Did you send her a copy of the deed?" Silence, then an exasperated sigh. "Okay, can you not make this a federal offense? She just wanted to see the layout of the house. She was excited. It's not like she's trying to steal it. She is not welcome there. You can't be this petty. She's our mother." I hung up. No shouting, no threats. I simply ended the call and began making real plans. That night, I logged onto my laptop and booked the cabin solid for 3 consecutive months. Friends, co-workers, even strangers from my husband's office, who wanted a weekend getaway. I had everyone sign rental agreements for $1 just to create a paper trail. Then I invested in a smart security system with live camera feeds and motion alerts. We were not going to be caught off guard again. The break came in early March. The snow was still thick in Big Bear. I was at home in Santa Clarita, monitoring the camera feeds on my phone out of habit while enjoying my morning coffee, when there she was, Susan, clad in a large beige coat and sunglasses, dragging a leopard print suitcase behind her. She approached the front door, paused, scanned the area, and retrieved a key from her purse. I watched as she unlocked the door and walked into our home without a second thought, as if she owned the place. I nearly felt ill. I called the police, without hesitation, informing them that a stranger had entered my residence and was trespassing. I provided them with the camera footage, showed them the deed, and remained calm. They arrived, and there she was inside, sipping wine while wearing our robe. They inquired who owned the house. She claimed it was a family property. They presented her with the paperwork and instructed her to leave, but she refused, so they escorted her out. She cried, of course, clutching her pearls and lamenting that she was being evicted from her family's legacy, and how she couldn't believe her son would do this to her. They didn't care. They don't arrest people like her. but they do issue warnings, and they did. She was formally banned from the property. That evening, she called my husband 17 times in a row. He didn't answer any of them. You would think that would conclude matters, but no. Now she was hurt, publicly hurt, and that meant one thing. She needed to restore her image swiftly. She began telling family, friends, and church members that we were unstable, that I had driven a wedge between her and her son, and that the house had actually been purchased with money she had loaned us. A falsehood suggesting we had swindled her out of her share. She declared war, and the worst part was that some people believed her. A few cousins distanced themselves from us. My husband's aunt, who used to send birthday cards every year, completely ghosted us. My husband's workplace even received a bizarre voicemail from a blocked number claiming he was under investigation for financial misconduct. The harassment was organized, subtle, and relentless. We began losing sleep and stopped attending family gatherings. But she made one mistake. She picked the wrong friend. One of my close friends, let's call her Danielle, works in title insurance. She's been in the industry for 15 years and knows how to detect fraud like a bloodhound. I asked her to quietly examine our closing paperwork. 2 days later, she called me. "You need to sit down." I did. "Your notary didn't just make a copy of your deed. She filed an unofficial amendment. It was rejected by the county, but it was still submitted, attempting to list your mother-in-law as a secondary beneficiary." I felt a chill. That wasn't just brazen. It was fraudulent. We had the email, we had the video, and now we had a paper trail. I wasn't going to overlook this. After discovering the fraud attempt on the title, I began sifting through every piece of paperwork we had: receipts, notary records, emails, even old text messages. Something told me we hadn't uncovered the full story. Then I stumbled upon something buried in our financial inbox. An old bank alert from a regional credit union in San Bernardino. It was from the time we were finalizing the cabin purchase. I didn't recognize the account number, but it was registered under both my husband's name and his mother's. I stared at it for a full minute. Why on earth would my husband share a bank account with his mother? I didn't mention it right away. I simply forwarded it to my friend Danielle and asked her to trace the account history. She called me back the next morning, her voice low and serious. "That account was opened 4 months before you bought the cabin." "Okay," I replied, "and it was used to transfer $2,500 twice, once in his name and once in hers." "What?" I exclaimed. "She set it up and used your husband's information. Full info, SSN, ID number, all of it. If he didn't authorize it, this is straight up identity theft." My hands trembled as I confronted my husband that evening. He initially looked genuinely confused, then angry. He was completely unaware of the account's existence. He called the credit union, and they confirmed it. But the voice on the recordings was Susan. She had forged his authorization. She literally used his name and information to funnel money through an account she controlled, likely to create some kind of documentation to argue later that she helped finance the cabin. This wasn't merely manipulation, it was criminal. And the worst part was that the money she moved came from a trust account left by my husband's grandmother, funds he had never touched, meant for our future children. That was the line. I realized she wouldn't stop until she lost everything. We hired a lawyer, a tough one, the type with cold eyes and a billing rate that made me want to vomit. But he was precisely what we needed. He drafted a formal cease and desist, complete with a demand for restitution and documentation of the forged bank activity. We also included a notarized affidavit from the credit union confirming that Susan had impersonated her son to authorize the transactions. Then came the title fraud documents and the final blow: the police report we filed for trespassing and unauthorized entry, supported by live camera footage. We were no longer just making noise. We were constructing a solid defense. We didn't send the information to Susan. We sent it to her church, her pastor, and the real estate board to which her daughter Melanie belonged. Then we waited. It took exactly 3 days for the cracks to become visible. Susan attempted to call us again. But this time there was less crying and more screaming. She left a voicemail that began with begging and ended with her shouting, "How dare you turn this family into a lawsuit?" My husband remained silent. He just listened and then deleted it. A week later, Melanie's real estate license was flagged for review, and her firm suspended her pending investigation. She called me, crying, stating she didn't realize it would escalate this far. I told her we hadn't anticipated it either, but here we were. That's when the family began to implode. Melanie flipped quickly. She began forwarding us texts between her and Susan, messages that made my skin crawl. "Just print the new deed. She won't notice. Don't worry. Once we're in, we're in. Your brother is weak. She's the one in charge anyway." Susan wasn't just toxic. She was calculating, like a slow-moving virus that infected people over time. But Melanie wasn't loyal. She was terrified. She offered to write a full statement confessing that she had helped her mother manipulate the paperwork under duress. We provided that to the lawyer as well, fully loaded. Meanwhile, Susan doubled down, hosting little support groups at her home, spinning tales about how we'd stolen family money and how we were trying to erase her from the family tree. She even printed fake family trees. I'm not joking. We found one in a photo someone sent us from Facebook. It listed my husband's name, his sisters, their cousins, but not mine. Instead of wife next to my husband, it read unknown spouse. I saved it, just in case. Our lawyer had an idea I hadn't considered. He suggested sending Susan a settlement offer. At first, I was furious. Why offer her anything? But he explained it wasn't genuine. It was bait. If she accepted the terms, she would be admitting to everything we accused her of, and we could later void it under duress if necessary. It would give us leverage. We drafted it with specific conditions. Admit to the fraud on the title. Acknowledge the identity theft regarding the bank account. Pay $25,000 in damages. Remain 500 feet away from the property permanently. And provide a formal apology in writing copied to her church. We mailed it certified and she signed it. Yes, she actually signed it. No lawyer, no red lines, just a hasty signature and a note saying, "I'm doing this to keep peace, but I still don't believe I did anything wrong." That letter is now framed in our home, positioned by the fireplace, right above the lockbox where we keep the original deed. The garden and the guest list settled down. Things grew quiet for a few weeks. No calls, no church posts, no anonymous voicemails. It was suspiciously calm, like the eye of a hurricane. I remember telling my husband, "She's not finished. She's just contemplating." And I was correct, as she had one last card to play. That card materialized in the form of a surprise family unity weekend, something she orchestrated behind our backs. She invited the entire extended family to the cabin, claiming we had offered it for healing and togetherness. She even created an invitation, which someone forwarded to me, sent from Melanie's old email to avoid detection. The flyer read, "Let's reclaim what's ours. Healing, forgiveness, and family at the house, built by legacy." I saw red, so we made a decision. We drove up to the cabin the day before the event, parked our car inside the garage, closed the blinds, and waited. The confrontation arrived at 11 a.m. on Saturday. Susan, Melanie, 3 aunts, 2 cousins, and a neighbor from her church, all dressed as if for some sort of retreat, carrying picnic baskets, coolers, and even folding chairs. I watched from the upstairs hallway, holding a camera, my heart racing. She approached the porch and tried the door. Locked. She knocked, then knocked louder. I allowed her to knock for a full minute before my husband opened the door. His face was calm, but his voice wasn't. "This is not your house." She froze. The others behind her stood still. "You forged my name. You stole from a trust account. You submitted false paperwork and deceived everyone here. This ends today." She stepped back as though slapped, but then, and I'll never forget this, she smiled. "You wouldn't do this in front of your family. You wouldn't humiliate me." Then he said the one thing I believe he had been waiting years to express. You already did that to yourself. He pulled out a folder containing copies of the bank, transactions, the fraudulent notary filings, the email with her schedule for matriarch weekend, and her signed apology. He handed it to the oldest aunt present, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Aunt Ruth, who had always seen through Susan, but remained silent. Ruth read every page slowly, then turned to Susan. You told me they cut you out, that they were unstable, that she, pointing at me, was trying to break up the family. Susan said nothing. Melanie began to cry. Another cousin stepped forward. Is this true? Susan finally broke her silence. I was just trying to protect our family's legacy. This house should be for everyone, not locked behind their anger. You stole from your own son, Mom, Melanie exclaimed. You dragged me into this. I almost lost my job because I needed someone to help. No one ever helps me. The words erupted from her like a dam bursting. She looked around like a cornered animal, her breathing quickening, the entire facade unraveling in front of everyone she had spent decades trying to control. Then she did the one thing that shocked me. She sat down right there on the front step. She didn't cry, didn't scream. She simply fell silent. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, Ruth said, You've done enough damage. Go home, Susan. They all left, one by one, back to their cars, quietly avoiding eye contact. Melanie lingered, for a few minutes, genuinely apologizing, expressing her shame, and stating she had never witnessed their mother unravel like that, and was done being her puppet. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. Once they were gone, I sat on the porch, watching the snow melt along the edges of the garden. That's when I noticed something strange, a patch of soil darker than the rest, looser, as if it had been disturbed. I grabbed a shovel and began to dig. About 2 feet down, I hit plastic, a sealed tote bag. Inside were copies of the cabin keys, a laminated guest list with names and dates, and a handwritten note. Let's build a family again, no matter what she says. We belong here. She, presumably, referred to me. I showed it to my husband. He remained silent for a long time before taking the keys and tossing them into the lake. We changed the locks again and filed one final police report for attempted unauthorized use and identity theft. The lawyer informed us we had more than enough evidence to press charges, but my husband didn't want to, not out of fear, but because he was exhausted. We severed ties completely, blocking every number and deleting every contact. No more holidays, no more check-ins, nothing. A few family members kept in touch, including Ruth, who sometimes sends postcards, never asking questions, just simple messages like, thinking of you both. The snow is lovely here too. Occasionally, I still review the old emails to remind myself that I didn't imagine any of it, that it truly happened, that we really stood our ground. The betrayal left a deep and peculiar scar. Sometimes it stings when I reflect on how easily we could have been manipulated into relinquishing our peace, our finances, and our sanity, all in the name of family. Other times, I feel relief because now I understand who we are without her, and I finally grasp that blood doesn't entitle anyone to your life, especially not someone who only arrives with open hands and sharpened knives. The cabin is tranquil now, just as we desired. No flyers, no guests, no phantoms, just silence and the creaking of the wood beneath our feet, alongside the sound of a fireplace we bought without any strings attached. That is true peace.